Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Catalyst webinar series presented by the Education Committee for the Southern California PGA. The Catalyst webinar series is a weekly educational platform for creating success and change in your club and career. We are very excited to have the one and only Kirk Reese on for going over career transitions, how to survive, adapt, and thrive. Kirk is the Executive Vice President of the Dennehy Club Thinking Partners. Mr. Reese, thank you very much for joining us on the Catalyst webinar series this morning. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. I appreciate the invitation to speak to such an esteemed group, and on the first day of the Masters even. Holy cow.
That's right.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to creating a dialogue about careers and how we look forward and how we progress in those. So I'm excited to present to the group today.
Thank you, Kirk. It's all yours. We have switched to the Zoom format over the last several weeks on the Catalyst webinar to make for more of an interactive format. So if you want to engage in your presentation, we can open it up to questions at the end, and we'll unmute all the attendees so that they could ask their questions and provide feedback, and we can speak candidly at the conclusion of the presentation. Thanks again, Kirk. It's all yours.
Thank you so much. Well, again, thanks everyone. I'm just very pleased to present to this great group, and certainly have had an association with a number of you over the past years in my previous capacities. A little bit about me. I'm a 27-year career veteran from the club management side. I grew up in clubs, a second-generation club manager. I've only worked at 3 clubs in my career, the Country Club in Brookline, the Chevy Chase Club in Chevy Chase, Maryland, and then of course the Los Angeles Country Club. So I have, if you're to pick 3 places to work, I guess you couldn't do any worse than those 3. But each of those places has a great golfing tradition, and certainly I was very pleased to work with some of the great professionals in the world. Don Callahan, who some of you know was at Thunderbird, but also moonlighted at the Country Club in Brookline. Obviously, Jim Schaefer, my long association with him. I was his caddy for a number of things, and then of course Jim Fitzgerald, who recently retired from Chevy Chase Club. So I really appreciate what you all do. So today we're going to talk about career path today, and we're going to talk specifically about transitions in careers, and sometimes they're planned and sometimes they're not planned. But we want to focus on when they happen, whether they're planned or unplanned. How do you focus on them, and how do you emerge better from them? We want to talk about how you think about your career path, your trajectory, in your profession, where your path takes you. We also want to talk about kind of how you think about your career. What are those things that you view are important and really will guide you to your own path? I was speaking earlier with a gentleman, actually another golf professional who in past years has kind of lost his way a little bit, but he's come back to his path and he's had success. So I'm happy to have assisted him in that respect. And then, really we'll talk about, when you're in front of a room of people or a single person, how you react, how, what people are looking for in terms of progressing through an interview process. And then finally, if we get to that point, the negotiation after a successful interview. So without further ado, we'll move on. And as I said, sometimes the time to move on comes quickly. Sometimes you're aware, hey, it's really time for me to find something new to do. One of the things that we always stress with transitions is it is always better for you to initiate transitions, for lack of a better term, to control your own fate. And even though golf has enjoyed, I think, a renaissance in the last year, more so than it ever has in the past 20 years. I know we've gone through this kind of steady decline in the industry of golf for the last generation, essentially. We do want to focus, while there are a lot more opportunities, and certainly, and perhaps we're moving into a phase where golf will expand again. We want to focus on what opportunities exist out there for you and your ability to understand or discern, when's it time to move on. So a few facts here, and this is, I will say this, I worked with the PGA of America on the executive search, Scott Kimmick, Michael Leemhays, a number of PGA headquarters who were focused on kind of bringing up the executive side. And so I've focused this more at the general manager, the executive path, but it's applicable to all PGA professionals. But and one of the things that we find is the general manager's tenures, the statistic is not encouraging, 3.4 years. We know it's a lot better. In fact, it's, I think, having had a discussion, it's a little over 7 years, I believe, in the PGA of America, which is great if you're a head professional. But the truth is, even with that, if you look at your career, that means you're going to transition on average 4, 5, 6 times during your career. And we expect transitions early on in our career, as we learn and as we apprentice and as we start to move up the ladder, so to speak. We like to think that our last stop is, 10, 15, 20 type year stops. But sometimes it doesn't work out that way. And it's sometimes tenuous in our industry. And as you can see, 2008, 2009, obviously the effects of the Great Recession, obviously the pandemic early on, a lot of people were laid off only to be brought back and whipsawed right back into working 50, 60-hour weeks as golf became a haven. So, but understand this. I mean, every so often there's going to be circumstances in our business which cause transition. One of the things that we also focus on with candidates is that we all live in truth, and that means we sit down, we take stock of where we are, we understand what we're capable of doing, we understand what the business is capable of, and that how we fit in that business model. And so when we, as we look at kind of taking control of our own professional path, we want to make sure that we, really honestly take stock of how are things going and how are we contributing to that success. And if we've done all we can and we feel like we need to move on, perhaps it is time to move on. It's not easy to do, uprooting sometimes family and your own work path. But the truth is that sometimes we need to move forward, and moving forward, sometimes moving to a different opportunity. We usually say if there is a transition that's caused not by you, but by your employer, we need to, we ask that there be a clinical assessment of what happened. And it's really, really important for candidates to focus on that part of transition, which is why things happen that way. Now, it's easy to point to, as I mentioned, a pandemic or a Great Recession and say, gee, we were having, the business was having issues and we needed to make some hard choices, and some clubs made hard choices. In fact, we saw a lot of compaction, particularly at the executive level in 2008 and 9 in particular, because, they said, okay, we have a lot of high salaries here. We need to figure out, well, we think our head professional can perform in the role of the general manager, and the board will help out more. So we saw a lot of compaction in terms of executive. But we need to, one of the basic things that you'll have to understand is, why did they make that choice between this person and me? Or why am I not without a job, or for whatever reason, and a clinical assessment, and by that, I mean, a very objective look at why things happen that way. And I would ask that you seek that response as part of your exit from the organization, to make sure, because it's important that the next organization who wants to hire you understands exactly why that happened, that you've digested why the transition occurred, and that if it was something which you could have prevented or perhaps contributed more to, then perhaps they want to understand what you've learned from that. So be clinical in your assessment of what happened. And then, as a recruiter, validation is everything. We need to understand kind of, hey, we hear it from you, but we also want to hear from the other person. When you put a list of references together, a lot of times references are put together which say, hey, I know this person, they know me well. That's great. Those are more personal type references, maybe less to do with business acumen. We hate to get into reference and understand, well, this person really doesn't understand, or can't answer the questions that we want to have answered in terms of validating the candidate. So make sure that when you're looking at putting your resume together and your reference list together, that they include people that you reported to. And good, bad, or indifferent, we're going to get to those people anyway, but it's helpful if they're on, if they understand they're going to be referencing you sometime in the future. One of our things with transitions is really we focus on leave the past in the past. This is, don't miss your old girlfriend kind of stuff, or your old boyfriend kind of stuff. Make sure that you moved on from whatever that is, and it's hard to do sometimes. I mean, we put our heart and soul into our jobs. We're people pleasers. I think typically in hospitality and in the golf world, we like to have happy people around us, and sometimes it's hard to break those relationships or break that pattern. Just make sure that when you're looking and when you're interviewing for your next job, that they don't feel like, hey, you wish you were still at your last job. I've had candidates, in as much say that, and then I've had clients say, well, they still want to work at the place that just fired them. So just understand, be sensitive, make sure that you're running towards your next opportunity. We want to focus in the interview on what you'll bring to the next employer, what will you do for them specifically, and then most importantly in this time, and I know it's really hard to do because if there's a transition that's been forced upon you, it's hard to enjoy your free time and hard to embrace that. I think we've had a taste of that as part of, and quite frankly, more than ever, and more totally than anyone could have ever imagined with the pandemic. And I think we're probably used to that and could adapt a little bit more readily to enjoying and recognizing free time. But you have a family, you have your friends, you have your community, all of those things which enrich your life outside your career path. And it's really important that you both engage them, and use them as resources and quite frankly, as a source of comfort. Um, Being introspective about your next opportunity, really taking that time as part of this free time. Don't just jump literally from the frying pan into the fire. What will interest you and allow you to succeed in your next position? You know, you're going to have choices. I mean, and sometimes people decide, gee, I'm a great merchandiser, maybe I should be in sales. Sometimes people decide, I'm better, I'd be better off, our family would be better off by living geographically closer to where our family is. Um, Really kind of understand what are those things that you want to go for, because all of those things, you should have a list or prioritize those things which are most important in your next position. And then what will allow you to succeed in your next position. And again, knowing yourself and being able to describe those things, because not only will they be asked in interviews, but when you start your next job, they're going to be really important that they manifest themselves and allow you to succeed in your next position. And when we look at what those things could be, it's making members happy, a servant's heart that most of us bring to our jobs. Do we want to lead transformational change? Is this is this a place that needs to be kind of picked up and shaken up and then made into something different? Is it building a successful organization and team? Is it making organization out of disorganization or dysfunction? Is it all, in terms of positive change, is it achieving a level of compensation and benefits? Do I need to work for this much? Or if I'm going to take in my next opportunity, I need to move for this much? And, creating order and governance, that's more of an executive or manager, kind of helping a board leadership get focused on the right things, being strategic versus a micromanaging board. Sometimes it's being the grand master, being able to be the leader and be the guy or be the gal, be the person who really leads the organization. Some people really do focus on that, and then some people just simply look for work and family balance. And it's not easy to achieve, as we all know in our business, but it is achievable. And a lot of times you set the table for achieving that work and family balance by, in the interview process, to say these are important to me. Teaching my kids, or coaching my kids, or doing things like that. Those things can be really, really important, but they're important to put on the table as part of what you think. I mean, it's who you want to be, where you want to go. Also, during the downtime, I have a phrase we like to say: sharpen your sword. What are you doing with your time that adds value to a future employer? Whether it's classwork, anything that's adding to your repertoire of skills, and anything that says, I'm just not sitting at home wondering where my next job is coming. Get out, get active, activate your network. A couple of the favorite things I can do. I mean, I've talked to three guys who are down at the Masters right now, working at the Masters, because that they were able to do that. And then most of us have access through through the PGA if people need help for some major event or other types of things, or you simply say, hey, you've won in the AGM Platinum Award in terms of merchandising. Gee, I want to see what you do and how you do it. Get out and see those things. At the very least, it just gets you out and amongst your companions. If you want to sharpen your teaching sword, then get out and get with get with someone who's a top 100 teacher and see what you can pick up in terms of putting. Any of the skills and strokes, or playing, and understand player development. That's one of the key issues right now. Is if we've got all this play, we've got all this interest in play, how do we capture it? And so maybe, and I view player development as a way that we're going to capture that. So shadowing a content expert, continuing to your education, even outside seminars such as this and through the PGA, is really important. At the very least, to get your name out and circulating. Study your profession. Again, a lot of PGA professionals have chosen to continue education through CMAA, through the National Club Association, getting CCMs. We think that's important, and then particularly, and as our organizations get more professional, and it's funny because as our industry has continued to shrink over the past generation, our clubs have finally figured out, hey, we've got to be better in business. And a lot of this is allowing our professionals to be professionals and more professional. And so again, studying your profession and enhancing your skill set in that respect. Many clubs that view their golf professional now, not as a golf professional in the historic or traditional sense, but as hey, you're the vice president of golf. And so, it's important for you to stay relevant. Technology is important for us, particularly as we all know, those of us who transferred from no tee times to, okay, now we have to have tee times. Our members want to be engaged in different ways, and so we have to be relevant with that. And then, keep your network up, touch base with people, let them know what your situation is. Open yourself up. And that's one of the hardest things to do for us is sometimes if we have a transition that is put upon us, that we really, maybe there's embarrassment, maybe there's, gee, I can do this on my own. Listen, people want to help. And if anything, when these types of things happen, just having extra ears to the ground of someone who can call, and you never know when you're going to get a call from a colleague that says, hey, I heard this, why don't you go see if you can apply there? And a lot of times those things do bear fruit, at least getting in the door and interviewing. And then just renew, clean up your files, make sure that you freshen up any product and I know you all typically as PGA professionals present portfolios. I've seen some really great portfolios from PGA professionals, and I've seen some ones that obviously weren't updated as part of as part of the process of interviewing and looking for a job. Make sure, and I would say it's just a best practice annually, regardless of whether you're looking or not. Just make sure that your portfolio, your CV, your resume, all of those things are updated, so you're ready to go in case something happens. Speaking of your resume, accuracy is unbelievably important. Everything that you write on that resume will be verified by a third party at some level. And so whether it's a recruiter, whether it's someone referencing, or whether a company is paid to go back and verify everything on your resume. Did you receive that degree? Did you work from this date to this date? Everything will be verified, and you can just presume that if things are not verifiable, that's going to be a problem. It's usually a problem kind of near the end, and that's the last thing you want to have happen is trying to explain why something on your resume doesn't line up with something that didn't get verified. Please proof. It's as easy as hitting the spell check, and I think all of us are where we should be doing that, but sometimes it's late at night, we need to get this out, and we press send maybe before we should. Just make sure you have a finished product. Once you finish it, put it in a PDF form, and that way nothing can change, and you feel good about what it is. There are obviously a number of experts out there who will help you write a resume. You have certainly different forms and formats that you can use, but it's really important. I always say with resumes that it needs to be long enough to convey what you've done, but really short. It's almost bullet point to say, hey, we don't want to bog you down by reading, War and Peace. If it's more than 2 pages at this level, it's really probably too much. Experiment with formatting. There's been some really creative resumes that come through. Some really pop at you because they speak to you about what you're looking for. I'm a person who would say you want to articulate your resume towards the opportunity. Sometimes you want to highlight things maybe that you've done in the past, which you view are critical to getting the job. So don't hesitate to do that for different things. But again, just make sure you format, you spell check, and do those things. And then illustrate your career progression and major accomplishments in a logical fashion. This is like kind of the ladder, stepping up, stepping up, stepping up. It should be kind of understandable. Gaps are really hard, particularly at the highest levels. We expect gaps kind of, if you're in your 20s and 30s, for example, we expect lots of job change and maybe an occasional gap as you say, hey, maybe I'm falling out of love with the golf industry, and you get out and you say, no, I want to fall back in love with it. Those things are okay. Don't, explain them, explain what happened. And those are easy explainable. It's not so easy to explain those things once you pass the age of 40. Generally 35, 40 is where we're starting to look at, hey, how serious are you about the business? How much success have you had in it? So make sure that we focus on that career progression and hopefully an unbroken line of increasing responsibilities, increasing pay, increasing titles. So and then emphasize actionable items. These are things which I would say, what are the highlight, what's your highlight reel of your career? What are the things that you're most proud of? What are the things that really you caused? And one of the things, it's easy to be a part of a winning team. Sometimes it's hard to discern what you did as part of that team. So you want to emphasize your role and what you brought to the team in that respect and that causation. And then, the other thing you do is as this, and really, sometimes you haven't interviewed in a while. And so you got to practice, and, and sometimes it's practicing with your spouse. Sometimes it's practicing with a fellow professional. I know I've done that even before I got into my present career. I did that with people who were ready. We did that with interns who were ready to move forward, certainly some people that were transitioning. Happy to do, we were happy to lend our time to do that. And usually it turned out very successful. But do practice with friends that will give you feedback and constructive feedback. They're not just going to parrot and say, hey, that's great, but they're going to say, hey, you have a habit of touching your nose when you interview, or you say a lot. And that's not good in an interview, particularly when you're not in a room. So be focused on getting people in the room with you who will give you constructive feedback, because it's really important. They see you in a way that you don't see yourself. Be ready for the question. Now, if you've had a transition put upon you, you haven't left, then you're going to get the question. And the question really is, well, why did you leave? What caused the separation? And sometimes it's really hard for people to answer that. And sometimes it's an emotional question. Sometimes it brings forth even anger. I've seen people who respond to that question or that type of question with anger and frustration. You can't answer a question like that. So you have to practice that question. You have to practice, well, why was the transition? What happened? And why am I better for it? What did I learn from it? And you have to do it in a way that is non-emotional, and one that really emphasizes, hey, I've moved on from it and I'm ready for the next opportunity. And if I needed to learn something, I learned it, and we're off and running. And then finally, one of the things that really impresses people is that you want to show the passion for the job. And in a room where people are looking, sometimes because the level of talent is equitable, it's fairly on the same level. The person who is running more toward the job, who shows that passion and who really brings, hey, I know about you, I've studied about you, I've heard about, I understand who you are, and here's what I can do for you, and I'm excited to start. Those who bring that type of passion into that room, a lot of times that carries them forward. It may not get them ultimately the job, but it certainly it certainly reflects well on the candidate. We always want you to say, we want you to look and act like a great candidate. As when you first envision, when a hiring authority, whether it's a committee or a position, first sees you, they begin an envisioning process. it's really important for them from the time that they lay eyes on you, that they're thinking, is this person going to fit, in our organization? Is this person, does this person look like what our members think that next position is going to look like? And understand from, it literally is from the first impression. As Phil Keister said in Shannon, Ireland, you never get a second chance to make a great first impression. Just make sure that you understand that everything you do, and once you enter that room, is under the microscope. It should go without saying that we invest in personal grooming. Make sure that I mean, it's almost like it's like the first date with your spouse. Just make sure that you've done everything you can to make sure that you're well presented. Again, during the time off, take care of your health and well-being. Those things are reflected in the room. And if you're not sleeping, if you're tired, if you have bags under your eyes, just make, those things, obviously they don't show well in a room, particularly when you're looking at the other candidates who are coming in. They're fresh, they're bubbly, they have that they have a real good personality and presentation in the room. Dress professionally and conservatively. We all, I think, in our profession, there's a level of decorum in golf. We all know, certainly as PGA professionals, that we all want to dress the right way. We want to make sure that we meet the minimum standard of what's expected. Generally speaking, for a job that you interviewed for, if you weren't wearing at least a jacket as a male and you weren't really, dressed well, then that's probably, going to discount your candidacy. So I would dress one rung above the people who you would sit in the room. You may be in a committee full of people who are in golf attire, who are wearing shorts, who are doing that, but they want to see you. Again, that part of that envisioning process is how you present yourself as a professional. Visit a tailor. Sometimes you don't wear those jackets and suits a lot. Just make sure that they fit correctly. Again, at that level, I've seen candidates disqualified because they didn't button certain buttons on their shirt. And so, and to that level, making sure that you're wearing a properly fitting suit, jacket, shirt, blouse, whatever. Just make sure you are well presented, shoes polished, all of those types of things. Remember etiquette, display good manners. Sometimes it's more important in other parts of the country than perhaps in Southern California. But I know in the South, if you're not standing up when the lady stands up, you're probably going to get dinged for those types of mannerisms. Show that hospitality gene. Smile. Show the graciousness of our business. And then, above all, I would always get to where you're interviewing a little early. I would get out of the car. I would look in the mirror before you get out of the car, or go in and ask for a restroom and just make sure you're properly arranged. Sometimes the tie is kind of off the collar. Sometimes it's a little askew. Sometimes there's something which you drank some coffee, you have a crumb from something. All of those things really count. So please do make sure that you're professionally recognized. For video interviews, pardon me, sorry about that. Our slide actually got it looks like it had an issue. Video interviews like I'm doing right now are really important, and particularly in today's day and age. I think we're emerging, and I'm hopeful that we're emerging from our video interviews, and Zoom calls, because this is a personal business, and it's really important for people to see you face to face, and to understand who you are. And it's important typically for you to see the asset, get on the property, and see what you're being asked to manage. But video interviews, because they're rigor, and I think they're around to stay. Certainly as a first interview mechanism. Hey, we're interested in you. We want to put you on a video. It may be with a smaller group than the entire search committee. But the first thing I would say is, again, be prepared. All the things that we said about showing up for a live interview: be dressed, look professional, practice the video interviews. And I'm going to say, don't get too close and don't get too far. We want you right about here, where your shoulder, you got a nice head and shoulder shot. We can't see every pore on your nose, but we can see expressions. And those are really important because it's part of engagement. And so to the extent that you can engage people in that, A lot of times people have issues downloading the software. You want to make sure prior to getting onto the video that you've done a test run with the software and being able to get on with the Wi-Fi. You want to be in an area which is free from distractions, whether it be your dog, your children, other types of things. If there's street work going on outside on your street, you want to make sure that you're kind of as far away from that as you can. And sometimes these things can't be managed. I mean, you can't help those things, but you want to try and mitigate them as much as possible to avoid distractions. And so, again, video interviews are here to stay. Make sure that you're focused. Make sure that you're focused on your video presence. And it's hard to give executive presence through interviews over Zoom or other types of video type media. But it's really important that you do practice. It's how you project your voice. It's being clear. It's being focused. And again, how you project executive presence over video is really important, simply because you're not in a room with someone, and that helps connect you with people. So as we get to the interview process, are you ready? When you're ready to get your next job, you raise your hand by raising your profile. You get active in recruiters. And one of the things that I would say that we don't do enough of, perhaps in our own career development, our own advocacy, is telling our story. And part of telling our story, as I mentioned, we want to update the things that we do on an annual basis, because we want them to be reflective of the things that we've accomplished and how we have progressed in our career. But you can do that through LinkedIn. You can do that through contact and the occasional contact with people who do the interviewing, people who from PGA Executive Search, people from Dennehy, people from Copland Keyboard, people there are a number of people who you can speak with about, hey, just if there's anything like this that comes up, this type of opportunity, this place in the world, this geography, in terms of we would love to be there. And that just gets your profile up. It doesn't mean you're looking for a job outright, but it certainly is helpful that if I knew that you wanted to be, hey, in Orlando because your parents were in Orlando, it's important that you get that out there, because if you in the recruiting world, we put you in bucket lists. People who want to be in Florida, people who want to be a head pro at a U.S. Open golf course. I mean, those types of things, and it allows us to kind of understand who you are and where you're coming from, and then evaluate you. You need to have, each of us should have a personal marketing strategy. Engaging your network. Who are the people who you want to tell your story? And again, sometimes it's recruiters. Sometimes it's people, your contemporaries. Sometimes if you're looking to move to Nashville, then getting to know people in the PGA section in Nashville is important. So again, employ your own marketing strategy. Prepare references, and if you're, because a lot of times these jobs they come up fairly quickly. Usually we'll have 2 to 4 weeks to aggregate candidates for this, and so again, this is not a lot of time for you to say, hey, I've got 3 months to think about this. No, we need to know whether you're ready to go, and and most importantly, we want to start talking to references, because again, it's important for us to validate the things that you say you've done on your resume or in your CV. We want you to manage your public face and social media, and generally speaking, you can expect we're going to do social media checks, and and so we're going to understand, hey, do you like to put together Japanese sniper rifles in your spare time? Okay, well, there's going to be a reaction in some circles for some things that you put stories out on social media about. They could be political, they could be, points of view, they could be just one-offs, and hey, I had a drink, and type something in there. You just have to understand that all that stuff, once it hits that network, whether it's on Facebook or LinkedIn or any of those things, it's fair game for people to look at. And and everything cuts 2 ways. I mean, sometimes, hey, this person's conservative, that's great. Hey, this person's conservative, that's terrible. It just depends. I mean, you just don't know how that's going to cut. We try and say, be as vanilla as you can, while showing the things that are important to you in those areas, or just manage what people can see on Facebook or on LinkedIn. There are certain times where you can't access in LinkedIn unless people know you. So manage that public face as best you can. And then what we're seeing more and more of are personal websites and personal websites that are around work. We see a lot of it actually with superintendents because they're showing their story, their work product, particularly after renovation processes or in things that they're doing. But they're applicable certainly in the PGA realm as well. And sometimes it's good to direct people to those types of things. And it shows an acumen to technology, which quite frankly is a differentiator these days. I would say you probably want to maybe take a look at a personal website for your professional life. Show yourself, not just your work self. And I know we want to be vanilla, but we also want to say, hey, I'm grounded, I have a family, or these are my interests outside work. I'm not just golf, golf, golf. I think those are important to show. And then again, we focus on where your target is, where you're going to achieve that next position. We want you to get out there and research a job market. Again, putting feelers out in areas that you potentially want to go to. But don't overdo it. Don't overreach. Don't pester people. Have a sensitivity toward other people's time. All right. Let's see. Pardon me. All right, and so again, we start with where do we want to look at, in the executive search world or PGA certainly, and I want to pay a compliment. I've rode shotgun on a couple of PGA executive search where they've looked for the head professional. I've been very impressed. Most recently, Cherry Hills is one of my clients. We're doing a lot of work there. Andrew Shuck was selected, and I think the world of Andrew. For those of you who don't know him, he's terrific. But the PGA executive search, and I think is really come a long way in a short amount of time. If you're looking at more executive managerial positions, CMAA certainly still the cream of the crop there. I would, again, as you move forward and maybe stepping up from golf and into managing entire facilities, the educational path, and I've had discussions with Mike Leamhays and others on this, is that there's nothing better. And Mike's been in that position of both coming up the PGA side and being CMAA president. But nothing is better than the educational processes through CMAA. We do, like Dennehy Club Thinking Partners, KK&W, Master Club Advisors, there's a number of search firms out there. We're in the position of mostly dealing with the top 20, 25% of clubs. A lot of clubs feel like, hey, we have the resources to do our own search. Just make sure that if you're working with a recruiter, do fill out the forms because they help us sort candidates. It just allows us to access people who are relevant and to a search for us, and it enables us to get to them faster. Touch base with all the hospitality recruiters in your area, and again, either PGA or CMA chapter employment services. PGA Executive Search does such a great job of kind of casting the nets out for people, and then in terms of bringing candidates to the clubs, I think they're really effective, and I love the videos. But again, same thing when you go through the PGA Executive Search and you go through that video process. Again, make sure you get that video right, and take the time if you need to re-record it. I know you can't re-record sometimes, but to the extent that you could, or practice before you hit record, it really does show up. And then, one of the underrated things in our business is referrals from individual clubs and their members. It is really important that if people think well of you, it will show, and you'll be able to, I think, advance very quickly into a search. People will say, hey, we've heard about this person. We met this person. We're going to advance them. We don't need to have a first interview. They're going to be advanced in the process. And so a lot of times referrals from either individual clubs or their members will get you further down the road. So, pardon me. So I want to talk a little bit about what I do as a recruiter. And sometimes there's confusion about this, and understand one thing: I am not a kingmaker. Okay, I don't hire you. I find talent for the people who hire me. I find people who fit a specification that with the client we've agreed to look for. A lot of the work that I do it really is in the rigor of looking at what the position is and what it's not, looking at various things like level of compensation, looking at various things like desired outcomes, and then trying to find candidates who will be able to deliver on those outcomes. And so my view is I'm trying to find a perfect marriage between a candidate and a club. And so I spend a lot of time in a diagnostic review. It's not unusual for me to spend 2, 3, or 4 days on property at a club, doing 360-degree reviews of the team, understanding the peer reports. You know, I talk to the controller like I talk to the first assistant. And I really kind of, and then doing focus groups with members, understanding what the membership expectation of this is, not just leadership's expectation, either through the executive or through the board or the committee. So, so we get in and we challenge the club, and then we drop the specification through that review, and then but it also tells us about the state of the business. I mean, we're going to tell you, hey, you know, here's some, it's our job not just to sell you on something, but to really tell you about the opportunity. Because the last thing that I want to hear from someone that I place is, I wish I would have known this before I took this position. I would say to you, it's incumbent upon all of you to ask those questions. Hey, this club has a great name, but really, how is the business model? Do they have a full membership? What are the problems that they've had in the past? Why did the last person leave, or or what happened that caused this person to go? So, you know, how intrusive are the committees? And a lot of people say, "Gee, that's my dream job. I'll take this club regardless, and I'll try and work to change it from within." But a lot of times it just doesn't work, and sometimes it just leads to frustration and leads to, "Gee, I wish I would have really asked a question and, you know, maybe passed on this opportunity." So understand that my job is to tell the story of the club and the marketplace, but it's also to have an accurate depiction of what the opportunity is and what it's not. And for you to be able to ask me, "Gee, you know, is this something that it's viable, and why would this work for me? Why wouldn't it work for me?" It's, you know, this is a give and take in the interview process. It's not just me saying, "Hey, here's 6 candidates and let's hire one." It's me really kind of understanding that you understand what is expected, and, you know, and I'll be frank. I mean, I with some opportunities, I tell people it's going to be hard, and the first 2 years, maybe the first 3 years, and these things are going to be hard, and there's no guarantee of success. And we mitigate those things by either paying more or guaranteeing compensation. But if you're only at a place for 2 or 3 years, that really doesn't matter anyway. So we want to make sure that we really get people focused on the job at hand and what they have to do to be successful. I develop a range of talent. I'll take anyone who has, you know, we identify 2 things as part of our process. One is potential and one is experience. So who's done the things that the club needs to have done, and who has the potential to do those things? How do you think about them? Do you bring the enthusiasm? Those types of things. So we'll develop a range of talent and we'll present those to the club. And then again, as we recommend talent, we do not function as a hiring authority. Most recruiters in this business have a guarantee of 1 or 2 years, just depending upon what the position is, and to the extent that we guarantee that if that position comes open for any number of reasons, we will redo the search at no cost to the club. So our word is on the line. You know, our reputation's on the line to make sure we get the right people in there. But the club has to hire it. And there are clubs that are really difficult. And, you know, I remember John Sibald, who's one of the precursors in our business. He was he was a kingmaker, actually. If you look back in the 90s and early 2000s, I mean, if you're a club of any repute, you hired John to do this. And John had a list of clubs, and, you know, one of them in the Midwest, which is a very it's got a great golf reputation, but, you know, it was said of that club, it's where club managers' careers go to die. Because they went through a series of managers every 2 and 3 years. And I've been in a room with a club who says, "Gee, we're hiring our 7th golf professional in the century the club has been open." And then under my breath, I say, "Yeah, but you're on your 7th manager in the last generation." So we want to make sure that we kind of true those things up with what the club is as an opportunity to candidates, and letting the candidates know. The club ultimately hires that individual. We're not, we're not the one who says, hey, you hire this person and that's it. We'll say, hey, here's the range of talent. We'll guarantee this range of talent. You pick one, and we'll guarantee them. And then the final thing is, and particularly as a recruiter, we want transparency. We want to know, we want to know stuff that maybe you wouldn't tell other people, but we have to know that stuff, because if we get in the room and we find out something different, or worse, when we're checking references further down the line, we find out something different. Your inability to be transparent will cost you a seat at the table for that position, and probably a seat at the table for future positions. So, sometimes it's tough to give bad news, but it's really important that you do give bad news when it's necessary. So. We talked about the candidate profile. We develop a source document describing what the candidate is. It's constructed by the hiring authority. It's actually constructed, well, it can be constructed by the hiring authority, but if there's a recruiter, the recruiter typically constructs it, and then we have it blessed. And understand, when you read those, don't just look at it and say, I've got this. Every word of those things is parsed, and every phrase is constructed specifically for a reason. Make sure you understand. And that's part of that discourse going back and forth of, hey, you wrote this. Can I understand why this is written this way? It gives you a lot more color as to what the opportunity is. Anticipate interview questions based on themes contained in the position description. It's pretty funny sometimes where I get into an interview and when we ask a very obvious question based on, we even put what we call critical success factors. These are probably 6, 8, 10 things that you are really keys to your success in that position. But if you don't, if you don't have a really good answer constructed for those things that we've specified, hey, you got to be good at this, then you're probably going to be disqualified as a candidate. So read through that profile and look for those themes and kind of anticipate, hey, this is where the questioning may go, and I need to be ready to answer something like that. And then, the candidate profile will we have if I were to loosely say, there's 100 characteristics in a candidate profile. If you have 90 of them, you're a good candidate. If you have 60 of them, you're a less good candidate. Doesn't mean you won't be considered, but the more you check the boxes, the easier it is for us to say, yeah, that person can do this job, and we'll have more confidence in putting you forward as a candidate to be considered. And then the final thing is, again, how we frame those expected outcomes. So, and we do a lot of, in our work, a lot of outcome-based interviewing. So we'll ask you, hey, can you talk about how you think about doing this, in this environment? And yes, even with limited knowledge of the organization or the business model, I mean, you're going to be asked questions about how you can produce certain outcomes. And so understand that's what you bring to the club. What hiring authorities look for: the brand veneer of prior employers. If you have the Country Club, Chevy Chase Club, and LA Country Club on your resume, yep, that's going to get you noticed quicker. It's just one of those things. It's not bad. What defeats that, and maybe not defeats it, but what kind of changes that is the fact when you have great referencing. When someone says this person is going to do great things in their career, they excelled here, they as an employee, they took things off my desk and made my job easier. That's the stuff that will get you noticed and helps defeat that brand veneer of prior employers. Sometimes there's this halo effect of, hey, I was associated with a great organization. Then we drill down and say, well, what did you actually do? And we don't find a lot there. And maybe, okay, well, you were part of a great organization, but what did you really do? So be focused on with responsibilities and the things that you're accountable for. Make sure you have achievement as part of as part of every position. What are your achievements? Those are really important to broadcast. We like to see vertical career trajectory. What does that mean? We like to see that you spent an appropriate amount of time doing the things that you were meant to do. As I said, younger, it's okay to job hop every 2 or 3 years. Hey, I want to live in Florida, or I want to live in California, or I want to work at a seasonal club, or but as the older you get and as people get to know you more, we'd like to see those 10 years go from 2 to 3 years when you're young to that 5 and 6 years, and then as you start to move in, minimum 5 years in a head position. My view of that is that how do we know what you've actually done if you've been there only 18 months or 24 months? I mean, yeah, you were there, but what did you do that stuck and that people would say, yeah, that's there. It's hard to do those things unless you're in a turnaround type model. and no one who wants to go into a turnaround model all the time. We look for that stability. Academics are important. At that level, most of the people in that room have a bachelor's degree. And I think, listen, my dad, he went to Cornell, he went to Texas A&M, didn't get a degree, smart guy. Jim Brewer, the guy that I succeeded at LA Country Club, 36 years, the general manager at LA Country Club, did not have a college degree, did not even attend college. He was in the Marine Corps, but one of the most well-read men that I've ever met. So can you get through with that? Yes, but less likely now than in the past. So understand academics still remain, it's a big thing. The skills, as a PGA professional, looking at a head pro job, playing is a big deal. And a lot of times as we attach playing a round of golf, with members of the committee, and sometimes if a committee member plays better than the candidate, sometimes that's not a good thing. And irrespective of how good that person is, I mean, part of the skills of being a head pro or being able to play well, and then being able to play well when you need to. And then there's select attributes specific to the club. Chevy Chase Club, one of the most formal clubs ever, and having a Jim Fitzgerald there really fit that bill. It was, having someone who kind of understood really that high level of etiquette. I remember going down my first day on the job there. He said, "Let me introduce you to your first member, Justice O'Connor. Meet Mr. Reese." It was Sandra Day O'Connor and her husband John. And so, but he, the introduction and how formal it was, and really, it showed that he was certainly at the right place. And then, the affordability, how much does it cost to hire you? And that's, usually one of the last parts of the equation. Generally speaking, in clubs, if they want to hire you, they'll figure it out. So, we tend to be somewhat fungible in saying, what people will pay, because a lot of times when clubs decide, hey, this is the person, sometimes they'll stretch a little bit to get to the right spot. Interviews, etiquette, and expectations. I just want to emphasize a few things here. Everything you say, it can be perceived differently. Again, everything cuts two ways. Cultivate your presence and think about how it's going to be received. Again, from the time they lay eyes on you, executive presence, it's and setting that tone in that room from the time you walk in, shaking hands, using names, understanding, and then the countenance in the room, how you answer questions. We have a rule that says, in interviews, we as the interviewers speak 20% and a candidate speaks 80%. That is not a license for candidates to really kind of drill on and on and on and on about something. Generally speaking, in an hour and a half or 2 hour interview, we want to ask 20 to 25 questions. Interviews are inherently a comparative process where we have to put apples against apples and oranges against oranges. We want you to answer or get to all 25 questions in that period. And if you go for 10 minutes on about, in question 3, we're not going to get in that time allotted to all the questions. So understand you want to be succinct, and this is part of this practicing. And when we get to focusing our practice on being a great interview, we want to be succinct. We want to get to the heart of the question. Sometimes I hear from people, hey, they didn't answer the question. And what's worse, the candidate doubles down by saying, hey, did I answer that question? And you can't lose yourself in an interview like that. You've got to be very direct, because again, this is that envisioning process of, boy, if I got them in a committee meeting and they do that, well, it doesn't look good for them, and it doesn't look good for me who hires them. So understand that you want to be your executive presence, how if you have to kind of think about the answer and then respond at a level which allows us to ask follow-up questions that are appropriate, but answer the question. Job one is answer the question. So we've talked about names and kind of, write names down. If you didn't get the names prior to the interview, going around the table for the introduction, write their names down, and please use their names. It's great etiquette, and it is remembered that personal touch within the room. Do your research on the club, and don't let it be authoritative to you. Don't let it be, hey, I've done this and I know that you do it this way, because don't make presumptions. Just say, I understand that things may be this way, but don't say this is the way it is and this is how I'm going to be, because a lot of times that may take you down the wrong path. that warmth, that hospitality genes, no distractions, be focused on all of, if it's a committee type interview, you want to spread the love, your head is on a swivel back and forth. That's why we tend to put candidates at the head of a table, so it's easier for you to see everyone and respond to everyone. Generally speaking, when someone asks you a question, look directly at them, and I will tell you, there's a really big bias, particularly if you are avoiding either certain people in the room or certain genders of people in the room. That is picked up very quickly, and it's not usually received well. Don't anticipate questions. I can see some candidates just grab the table and lean forward, and they're ready to answer the question, and you haven't heard the question. And sometimes, and because some committee interviewers, and we insist typically that I don't interview them, that the committee interviews them, they don't really know how to ask questions appropriately. So sometimes they have these 3 or 4 part questions. I would always say to you, have a pad, write down the questions that are being asked so that you can reflect on them, and then before you answer them, kind of take the 5 seconds it takes to kind of order your answer, and then be focused on giving a proper and composed answer, and again in a very short term. And then and then finally, we want candidates to ask good questions when they leave. We don't want you to ask 15 questions, but we do want you to ask 3 or 4 good questions. And they should be questions that have arisen during the interview as a follow-up, or questions that you have brought in, and not something that's a topical question like, hey, when are you gonna, when are you hiring this, or how much you're gonna pay for this? We never discuss pay typically in that first or second interview. But they should be good questions about, hey, I understand your club is this. Give me a little bit better understanding. Talk about the role of if it's unclear. Talk about things that you read in the position description about outcomes. If you're to prioritize these things, what are most important to you? Those are really good cogent questions that show you've done your homework, and that usually reflects well upon you. Leave behinds, always ask if there's a recruiter involved, or the head of the committee. If there's no recruiter, can I leave something behind? Do not presume you can leave something behind. All right. Sometimes they're well received and sometimes they're not. In the room, I will always say, be yourself. You are who you are, and we want you to be yourself, but we want you to be yourself while displaying executive presence. And the countenance. I don't want to say formality, but I want to say that people identify you as a leader. That's executive presence. Develop a plan of what you want to say and how you want to say it. Most importantly, tell them what you're going to do for them. When you answer questions, it's about what I'm going to do for you, where I'm going to take you, not what I've done in 10 minutes of history. I can do this for you. Clarity trumps intelligence. It's less important for you to be intelligent and use big words. And I've heard people try and use 4-syllable words in there. Be very clear. Be very direct in your answers. And if you don't know the answer, don't make up something. Be honest about what you do and what you don't know. Show that enthusiasm for learning things, and then particularly if you're a younger candidate, and we're showing you as potential, they want to know how you think about solving things, and maybe not that you've done that. Understand a first interview is a culture fit, and that they're looking at you culturally, and that has many different meanings. There are organizations I work with that have unbelievable cultural ethos. A Detroit Athletic Club, a Cherokee Town and Country Club. They're really spectacular places, and to be a part of this team means you're joining a culture, and that you need to fit in the culture. And so understand some of these things, particularly in a first interview, are about fitting into that culture. And then brevity, again, like I said, clarity trumps intelligence. Brevity in answers is really important. When people say, give us 5 minutes of your history, that means give us 5 minutes. Practice 5 minutes. In fact, practice 4 minutes, and in case you go over for whatever reason, make sure that highlight reel is just that elevator speech. Right? We want to gain future leadership's trust. We do that by showing what results we've delivered. We want to be visible. Again, how we've demonstrated being visible. We want to demonstrate that acumen, that business acumen about the hospitality, the club operations, and show expertise, particularly as it relates to finances. The third rail of any club is finances. The more business acumen you have in terms of running your business, and being able to cogently describe inventory turnover, and as banal as that might be, Those things are important in the room. Be truthful about the state of your abilities and what you can and can't do. Know what good governance is. And one of the things about this interview process is what do you need to be successful? So any question you ask about, hey, how are you this way so that I can be successful, is often well received. Be clinical in the assessment of the club's state of affairs. The like dating, as I described before, you're trying to be on your best and they're trying to be on their best, and they're trying to sell you what the opportunity is and you're trying to sell them on you as a candidate. Just make sure that you're clinical in that assessment of who they are, and that I believe in a good marriage between a candidate and a club. So that's why we say live in truth. And then one of the other things is empathy, and how you practice empathy in a room. Not by being kind of a puddle about things, but really kind of being reflective of in your leadership style, or in working with members or working with team members. That's really important to show in that room. It's more important than sometimes the actual accomplishments. Now, committees do think together. Often there's a chairman. Often the chairman leads. Great committees really debate a lot about what candidates bring to the table. And in a process where candidates are seen in different lights, a first interview, a second interview, some testing, we do case studies, for example, personality testing, whether it's disc studies, all those things it's like picking up a box and turning it over and seeing the different sides. And so, committees, good committees will discuss various aspects. I've seen, after following first interviews where we've had 5 or 6 first interviews, I've seen, initially we ask for, hey, who are the best candidates? And then we debate that. And I've seen first candidates not get second interviews, and I've seen people in last place get the job. So, understand that there's a group think that happens, but that in the best committees, everyone contributes, which is why connectivity to all committee members is really important. If you're going to get dinged if people feel like you're ignoring them. And then they begin as a comparison with positives, but then they look at negatives, particularly in second interviews. The further down the road you get, the playing field is pretty level, and so they're looking at disqualifiers sometimes more than they look at qualifiers. So again, anything that you can do, sometimes it's dress, sometimes it's something that's personal, not professional. Those are the things that you have to really manage that maybe people have looked at. They look at career trajectories and what achievements and results are evident, and what's verifiable. And then they look at what you can do to bring them to that next level. And then we always look at major in the majors. What are the priorities for candidates? What should they be able to do that takes the club where it wants to go? And every club is dynamic, so understand no club wants to just be static. So you have to focus on what those things are going to be and where that club as an organization needs to go. And then, the appearance, presentation, referencing. A lot of times, actually, we will do, and we mentioned second interviews. Second interviews are a lot more personal. And we mentioned the playing with members. We also do, there's sometimes there are group lessons done with members. So again, very personal. There's a social element in a lot of this stuff. So how people, kind of connect with you and bond with you is part of that. And sometimes if your spouse is involved, it's important for your spouse to show equally as well as you do. And it's not just that your spouse can come and be a wallflower, but they have to be engaged, and they have to, they participate in a way. And in some clubs, it's important for the spouse to be part of that community. And so understand it's not just you, sometimes it's also the spouse. And then finally, the referencing, it's a crucial affirmation of the fit and effectiveness of the candidate in the future. And this committee usually will have to refer to the board or to another governing hiring authority, maybe for confirmation. We have candidate scorecards. These are basically just how candidates look at you. I'm going to skip through this. I know we're kind of getting short on time. But this is a sample of candidate scorecard, and all of those characteristics. After you leave the room, the members fill these out, and then they will actually compare them. That's how they compare notes. The top 2 to 3 candidates typically have second interviews or finalist interviews. They'll be more technical, articulated towards towards key issues the club is solving for. Again, testing may be involved using case studies, IQ testing, background checks, that type of stuff, social media checks. Interactive conversations, such as presentations, are not unusual at this level. So make sure that your presentation skills are up. And again, something else to practice. I mean, as part of your executive presence. Again, the social settings that we talked about, as the level of interest goes up, so do expectations of being able to access information and the availability of you to share things with the committee. And so they want to, that's part of the getting to know you better and revealing who you are as a candidate. And the hiring authority likely will do rankings after each phase. It's not unusual, even after the final interviews, if there's two finalists, that they hold the second candidate, because if the first candidate, for whatever reason, they can't come to agreement, a lot of times they say, hey, this second candidate is great. I'm going to be very frank with you. That happens a lot more than maybe we like to think it happens. The first general manager position I got, I know I was probably the fourth person they offered the job to. I didn't care. I wanted the opportunity to be successful, and I took it. But sometimes it matters to candidates that, hey, if you didn't pick me first, then that's an issue. But generally speaking, be patient. Let the process work itself out, and even if you're candidate 1B versus 1A, a lot of times those people are really successful for all the right reasons. So. And then, following the interviews, we were going to ask what the candidate, what the process is and the timeline for selecting. Don't pester, be over anxious, show patience and respect in the process again, and then solicit feedback from the hiring authority or recruiter on interview performance and presentation. That feedback loop is really important for down the line, maybe for the next interview or for maybe an interview with another organization. And I tell you, thank you notes are always well received. Written thank you notes are really well received, and where people are reluctant to give out their email addresses, but if you write thank you notes, send them to the club. Usually they end up in the lockers. Well, compensation obviously is a big thing as we focus on where we want our careers to go, and while we don't live to work, we work to live. Compensation certainly is recognition for doing those things. Generally speaking, candidates, if we're looking for you to move to another position, usually it's plus 20 to 30% in terms of your current compensation. That's kind of a ballpark figure. It doesn't account for differences in either barriers like housing. If you're moving to a hot market like Seattle or Denver, trying to get you in that market, we recognize is a little more. And one of the things I would say is share, and again, don't hide things, but share things. This is what I need, and give everyone an understanding of what it takes to get you into that position. So please feel free to be expressive with what you need from the get-go. And I think it's important. I mean, if I've had candidates kind of for really top positions and have unrealistic expectations, and unfortunately it didn't come out until later in the process, and it caused them to kind of flame out in the process. And it really, that type of discussion, if it was held a few weeks earlier, probably would have headed that off, and that candidate probably would be successfully in that position. But they just had developed unrealistic expectations, and at a time when the club couldn't pivot or didn't want to pivot towards them. So, but be realistic about what you need, and understand that there are the strategies that involve win-win scenarios. If I do things there, if I do the things you need me to do, will that make me more valuable? In most cases, the answer is yes. And quite frankly, most organizations in the private club world love their employees enough that when they're successful, they really shower them. We see inordinate types of increases, and so we want to be focused on that. So, great. All right, and then finally, entertaining the offer. If you don't ASK, you don't GET. Again, that memo framing the expectation of compensation, get that early. Have that discussion with the recruiter or the committee chairman. That's helpful. Be reasonable in considering the resources. Form 990s are really good to help you frame expectations for where the club has been. Think win-win in negotiation. If I'm able to increase rounds, increase profitability, do this, do that, the things that are important to you, what does that mean for me? I think those are important. We're seeing more sophisticated packages as it relates to director of golf and head professionals as well as executives. Prioritize the things that you want for purposes of negotiation. Some things are more important than others. Just make sure we understand what those are. And then it's not unusual for more than one candidate to be considered for an offer. And again, that second candidate is a fallback. But again, whether you're the first or the second doesn't really matter if you get the offer. So, and then finally, this is not a tennis match or a ping pong match. We don't want to have a lot of back and forth. Generally speaking, one ask. Don't protract a negotiation for kind of tit tat stuff. Get it all up on the table. That's why I say, hey, put it in a memo. Let's get it all on the table and let's figure it out. And then everything you do when receiving an offer is still part of an interview, including negotiation. Sometimes people, I've seen clubs get frustrated with what they consider to be tit for tat stuff, and they've simply said, "Never mind, we're not interested in the candidate anymore." So just understand this is a preview for how they expect to deal with you as an employee. So very good. Thank you for your time. I appreciate, and we'll take questions.
Thank you very much, Kirk. That was a wonderful presentation and very beneficial to the section. Thank you very much on behalf of the Education Committee for the SCPGA. Thanks for coming on and sharing your expertise for our benefit. We are very grateful. There are a variety of questions that have come in, and for all the members that are on the Catalyst this morning, I have sent a request to all of you to unmute. So you do have the ability to unmute yourself and ask Kirk a question directly. I've got a couple questions of my own that I've gathered during the course of the presentation. Kirk, you talked about the average longevity of a general manager at a private club being 3 to 4 years versus a head golf professional that's more along the lines of 7. And we all know so many examples where a club goes through general managers every 3 to 4 years, and they've had 7 head pros in a century's time. Can you shed a little light on your opinion on what causes that to happen, or why that's the case at so many upscale private clubs?
John, that's a great question. I would say, and if you're in a Fortune 500 as a CEO, your average tenure typically is about 7.5 to 8 years. The average director position in a Fortune 500 is 8.5 to 9 years. In a private club, 3.4 years for the chief executive. The average board member serves 3 years. And so there's this alignment between strategic direction, the pendulum swinging with leadership and governance, and most clubs don't have a strategic view. And so a lot of times as perhaps priorities change in the organization, a new president comes on board and says, okay, we're going to do this or we're going to do that. A lot of times the executive is kind of left in the middle, kind of saying, well, I thought we were doing this. And they're viewed as kind of either, hey, you're trying to do the same thing as before. So I view it as steady hands on the wheel. Golf professionals usually aren't subject to that type of swing change underneath an executive typically. So I would say you're a good club focuses on strategic board leadership. They allow the professionals to do their job. And the other part about this is head professionals do something that members want to do. They want to play golf well. Most members look at a head professional and say, I want to be that type of person. I want to be that type of player. And in general, in the business sense, a lot of times the chief executive gets caught in either a bad financial issue or the fact that there's just a change of direction and they want to go another way.
And when you're contracted by various clubs, do you try to make it ultimately their decision for the main factor of, if it doesn't work out, not wanting to be held accountable for that decision? Or how do you walk that fine line?
Well, when we guarantee a candidate, and our guarantee for managers is 2 years because of the diligence we put forward. Generally speaking, it's a no fault issue, which is regardless of why they left. If they're not there in 2 years, we will do the replacement. Now we do go back, and again, part of our diagnostic process is a give and take. We identify, when I go into a place, and I've gone into a very prestigious old line golf club and said, your reputation is great, but for golf, but it's terrible for management. You're known to micromanage, and you have to change. And given they actually stopped the process, they within leadership had discussions for 4 months, and then came back, and they had, it was a leadership that involved the board, the committees, and ultimately communicating to membership about we need a new style of leadership from our executive. And they said we want a different type of leadership, and committed that way. And now they have a spectacular general manager and they have a new commitment to being a strategic board, which, a lot of clubs, I've had other clubs look at me and say, we're not going to change. And then 18 months later, their executive has their resume out, and 3 years later they're gone. So, we, asking and challenging them in that rigor. So when those things happen, we can say, yeah, they happen. And they happen because of a specific reason that we pointed out last time. But we still have to do the work. We still have to bring them a new leader.
Now, when you talked about in the interview process, the 20/80 rule, can you explain that a little more in depth in terms of talking and listening?
It's the job of the committee to ask questions. And again, it's a comparative process. So if we have a period of, say, an hour and a half or 90 minutes to ask 20 questions, we want to hear all 20 questions from the candidates, and we want them to be answers to be succinct enough where we can get through all the questions. If we need to press down on and get further information from the questions, and then that's great. But it really is for the candidate to answer the questions, to describe either their experiences, or their understanding of the problem or issue at hand, and how they would solve for it. And that's, ultimately how we compare candidates against each other, is say, who had the better response to these questions.
Any other questions from the attendees, all the members that are on this morning's Catalyst? You have the ability to unmute and ask Kirk a direct question. We did run a little bit over this morning, and we do thank you for participating and joining us on the Catalyst webinar series. Kirk, I think those are all the questions that we have this morning. On behalf of the Education Committee for the Southern California PGA, we want to thank you for your time and sharing your expertise with us. We're eternally grateful. Want to remind everybody that next week on the Catalyst webinar series, we have Dave Potus, Director of Golf at Bel Air Country Club, who's going to be coming on talking about the 10 most common misconceptions and mistakes when applying the rules of golf. So I want to make sure that you know about that. The registration for that Catalyst will be going out towards in the beginning of this following week. And once again, Kirk, thank you very much for being on the Catalyst webinar series. Thank you. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, stay sane.
And enjoy the Masters. Be well. Thank you.